What would you do if a billionaire walked into your grocery store and someone told him to go back to Africa? Would you stand by and watch, or would you step in? This is the shocking story of how one racist comment in just 10 seconds sparked a movement that changed an entire community forever. Before we dive into this mind-blowing story, I've got a quick favor to ask. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. You won't believe this, but the last time I asked, one of my subscribers shared that she'd been in a situation just like the one we're about to talk about. Can you imagine? It was a wild moment, and it reminded me why I love hearing from you. So tell me, where are you tuning in from? And hey, while you're here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Every single click means the world to us, and it's what keeps us bringing you more stories like this one. Oh, and if you're feeling extra awesome today, give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Let's spread the power of kindness and courage together. Ready? All right, let's dive in. Right in the heart of the city stood a high-end grocery store, the kind where everything looked like it belonged in a magazine. The aisles were lined with organic produce, artisanal bread, and exotic spices. Shoppers moved about, some pushing carts, others holding baskets, all lost in their own little worlds. Among them was Mrs. Johnson, an elderly woman with a sharp look in her eyes. She carried herself with an air of importance, like she owned the place. Her designer handbag hung neatly on her arm, and her perfectly styled hair didn't move an inch as she walked. She was the kind of person who made you feel like you were in her way, even if you weren't. And then there he was, Elon Musk. Yes, the asterisk. Elon Musk, the billionaire tech mogul who'd been making headlines for years. But here, in this grocery store, he looked normal, dressed in a simple black t-shirt and jeans. He blended in with the crowd. No entourage, no cameras, just a man picking up a few things for himself. He moved through the store with ease, glancing at items on the shelves like anyone else would. The store was alive with chatter, parents talking to their kids, friends catching up, and the occasional beep of a scanner at the checkout. But something was about to happen that would change the mood of the entire place. Something that would make everyone stop and stare. Mrs. Johnson was about to say something that would shock everyone within earshot. And Elon Musk, well, his response would leave the entire crowd speechless. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's set the stage properly. Because what happened next wasn't just a moment, it was a story. A story about prejudice, courage, and the power of words. So picture it, the sun streaming through the windows, the hum of conversation, and two people about to cross paths in a way no one could have predicted. What do you think happens next? Let me know in the comments section. Mrs. Johnson was in the produce section, inspecting a bunch of grapes like she was judging a diamond. Her eyes narrowed as she spotted someone familiar. Her face twisted into a scowl. She didn't know it yet, but in just a few seconds, her life and the lives of everyone in that store would change forever. Just a few feet away, Elon Musk was reaching for a bag of avocados. He didn't notice her at first. Why would he? He was just another shopper, minding his own business. But then, it happened. Mrs. Johnson turned her head, her eyes narrowing as she recognized him. Her face twisted into a scowl, and without a second thought, she marched over to him. The air around her seemed to grow colder as she approached. "You," she spat, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. Every head in the store turned. She pointed a trembling finger at him, her face red with anger. "You don't belong here. Why don't you go back to Africa where you came from?" Elon froze, his hand still hovering over the avocados. He looked up, confused. "Excuse me? You heard me," she snapped, her tone dripping with disdain. "Why don't you go back to Africa where you came from?" The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. Shoppers nearby stopped what they were doing. A mother pulling her child along paused mid-step. A cashier looked up from their register. Even the hum of the refrigerators seemed to quiet down. Elon stood there, stunned. For a moment, he didn't say anything. His face was unreadable, but you could see the wheels turning in his mind. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He was processing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The silence was deafening. Everyone was waiting to see what he would do. Would he snap back? Would he walk away? No one knew. Mrs. Johnson, meanwhile, didn't back down. She crossed her arms, her expression smug, like she'd just won some kind of battle. She didn't care that people were watching. If anything, she seemed to enjoy the attention. But then, Elon took a deep breath. He straightened up, his calm demeanor returning. He looked Mrs. Johnson straight in the eye, and when he spoke, his voice was steady. "Ma'am," he began, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The crowd leaned in, eager to hear what he would say next. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was a moment that would leave everyone in that store, and eventually the world, talking. But before Elon could continue, Mrs. Johnson cut him off. "Oh, I understand perfectly," she said, her voice rising. "People like you come here, take our jobs, and act like you own the place. Well, you don't. This is our country." Her words were like a slap in the face. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. People exchanged glances, unsure of what to do. Should someone step in? Should they say something? Elon, however, remained calm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't get defensive. Instead, he did something no one expected. He smiled, not a mocking smile or a sarcastic one, a genuine, patient smile. And then, he began to speak. But what he said next would change everything. Elon's smile was disarming. It wasn't what anyone expected, least of all Mrs. Johnson. She blinked, caught off guard, but her defiant expression didn't waver. She wasn't about to back down. "Ma'am," Elon began, his voice steady but filled with quiet strength. He paused, letting the silence hang for a moment. "I was born in South Africa. My parents worked day and night to give me a chance at a better life. And honestly, if I went back to Africa, I'd probably just start another company there too. They taught me that no matter where you come from, your dreams are valid. And when I came to this country, I didn't take, I built. I built companies that employ thousands, that push humanity forward, because that's what immigrants do. We don't take, we give. My parents sacrificed everything to give me a chance at a better life. And when I came to this country, I didn't take anything from anyone. I built something that has created jobs, advanced technology, and I hope made the world a little better." He paused, letting his words sink in. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. Even Mrs. Johnson seemed momentarily unsure of what to say, but she quickly recovered. "That doesn't change the fact that you're not from here," she shot back, though her voice had lost some of its earlier venom. "This country was built by people like me, people who belong here." Elon nodded, as if he'd expected her to say that. "You're right," he said. "This country was built by people like you, but it was also built by people like me, immigrants, people who came here with nothing but a dream. Think about it. Some of the greatest minds in American history were immigrants: Albert Einstein, Nikola Tesla, Sergey Brin. They didn't take anything, they gave, they contributed. And so have I." He took a step closer to her, not in a threatening way, but in a way that demanded her attention. "You know," he continued, "my companies, Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, they employ tens of thousands of people, people from all walks of life, people of every race, religion, and background. And you know what? That's what makes us strong. Diversity isn't a weakness, it's our greatest strength." Mrs. Johnson opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time she looked unsure. Her arms, which had been tightly crossed, loosened slightly. Elon wasn't finished. "I understand that change can be scary," he said, his tone softening. "It's hard to see the world changing around you, but instead of fearing it, why not embrace it? Why not learn from it? Because the truth is, we're all in this together, and the more we understand each other, the better off we'll all be." The room froze. You could hear the hum of the refrigerators, the faint rustle of shopping bags, even the distant chirp of a bird outside. Every eye was locked on Elon. It was as if the world had hit the pause button, holding its breath, waiting for his next words to change everything. Their eyes darting between Elon and Mrs. Johnson. Even the store employees had stopped what they were doing to watch. Mrs. Johnson's face flushed. She looked around, as if suddenly aware of how many people were watching. Her earlier confidence was gone, replaced by something else, embarrassment, maybe even regret. But Elon wasn't trying to shame her. His expression was kind, almost compassionate. "I'm not here to argue with you," he said. "I'm here to tell you that we're all human. We all have our struggles, our fears, our dreams, and if we can just see past our differences, we might find that we have more in common than we think." For a moment, no one moved. Then slowly, the tension in the room began to ease. A few people nodded in agreement, someone in the back even started clapping, and soon, others joined in. Mrs. Johnson, however, didn't say another word. She turned on her heel and walked away, her head down, her designer handbag clutched tightly in her hand. But the story didn't end there. What happened next would ripple through the store, the community, and eventually the world. As Mrs. Johnson walked away, the store seemed to exhale. The tension that had gripped the room moments earlier began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of quiet reflection. People exchanged glances, some nodding in approval, others whispering to one another. What had started as an ugly confrontation had turned into something far more profound, a moment of connection and understanding. Elon stood there for a moment, watching Mrs. Johnson disappear down the aisle. He didn't look triumphant or smug. If anything, he seemed thoughtful, as if he were replaying the conversation in his mind. Then he turned back to the avocados, picked up a bag and placed it in his cart. But the crowd wasn't ready to let him go just yet. A young man, probably in his early 20s, stepped forward. "Mr. Musk," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I just want to say, thank you. What you said back there, it really hit home. My parents are immigrants too, and they've worked so hard to give me a better life. Sometimes, it feels like people don't see that. But you put it into words." Elon smiled warmly. "Thank you for sharing that," he said. "Your parents sound like amazing people. Never forget where you come from, and never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong." The young man nodded, his eyes glistening with emotion. "I won't," he said firmly. Another shopper, an older woman with silver hair, chimed in. "I've lived in this town for over 40 years, she said, "and I've seen a lot of changes, some good, some not so good. But what you said today, that's the kind of change we need. People coming together, not tearing each other apart." Elon nodded. "Change is inevitable," he said, "but it's up to us to make sure it's change for the better." The conversation continued, with more and more people sharing their thoughts and experiences. A mother talked about raising her biracial children in a world that sometimes felt unwelcoming. A college student spoke about the challenges of being the first in her family to attend university. Even the store employees joined in, sharing their own stories of overcoming adversity. It was as if Elon's words had opened a floodgate, releasing a wave of empathy and understanding. People who had been strangers just moments ago were now connecting on a deeper level, finding common ground in their shared humanity. But the ripple effect didn't stop there. As shoppers left the store, they didn't just carry groceries, they carried a story. A mother told her kids about the importance of kindness. A college student shared it on social media, sparking a wave of conversations about diversity. Even the cashier, who had stayed silent during the confrontation, later said, "That day changed how I see the world." And in that moment, strangers became neighbors, united by a shared experience that reminded them we're all in this together. Social media lit up with posts about the encounter, with people sharing their own stories and reflections. The hashtag #WeBelong started trending, with thousands of people using it to celebrate diversity and inclusion. Even Mrs. Johnson felt the impact. She didn't say much as she left the store that day, but as she drove home, her mind was racing. She couldn't shake the image of Elon's calm, kind face, or the sound of his voice as he spoke about unity and understanding. For the first time in a long time, she found herself questioning her own beliefs. That night, she sat down at her kitchen table and opened her laptop. She typed Elon Musk into the search bar and began reading about his life, his work, his vision for the future. The more she read, the more she realized how little she had known about him and how wrong she had been. The next day, she returned to the store. This time she wasn't there to shop. She was there to apologize. But that's a story for another time. For now, let's just say that one moment, one conversation had the power to change not just one person, but an entire community. And that's the kind of change that lasts. The days that followed the incident at the grocery store were anything but ordinary. The story of Elon Musk's calm confrontation with Mrs. Johnson spread like wildfire. News outlets picked it up, social media exploded with discussions, and the small town of Palo Alto suddenly found itself at the center of a national conversation about diversity, inclusion, and the power of empathy. For Elon, the encounter was a reminder of why he did what he did. He didn't just build companies to make money or push boundaries in technology. He did it to inspire change, to show the world what was possible when people came together with a shared purpose. That day in the grocery store, he had seen firsthand how words could bridge divides and spark meaningful conversations. But the real transformation happened in the community. The store where the incident took place became a gathering place for people who wanted to share their stories and experiences. The manager, inspired by what had happened, organized a series of community events focused on diversity and inclusion. Local schools invited speakers to talk about the importance of embracing different cultures and perspectives. Even the town council got involved, passing a resolution to promote unity and understanding. And then there was Mrs. Johnson. She didn't return to the store right away. For days she stayed home, replaying the encounter in her mind. She thought about the things Elon had said, the way he had looked at her, not with anger or judgment, but with kindness. She thought about the crowd's reaction, the way they had rallied around his message of unity. Finally, she couldn't stay silent any longer. One afternoon, she walked back into the grocery store, her heart pounding. She didn't know if Elon would be there, but she hoped he would. She wanted to apologize, to tell him that his words had made her think, really think about her own beliefs and actions. As luck would have it, Elon was there. He was in the same aisle, picking out avocados, just like before. Mrs. Johnson took a deep breath and approached him. "Mr. Musk," she said, her voice trembling. I owe you an apology." Elon turned to her, his expression calm and open. "You don't owe me anything," he said gently. "Yes, I do," she insisted. "What I said to you that day, it was wrong. I was wrong. I've spent my whole life thinking a certain way, and I never stopped to question it. But what you said, it made me realize that I've been blind to so much. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." Elon smiled. "Thank you," he said. "That means a lot. But the real work isn't about apologizing to me. It's about what you do next, how you choose to move forward." Mrs. Johnson nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I will," she said. "I promise." And she did. In the weeks and months that followed, Mrs. Johnson became an advocate for change in her community. She joined local initiatives, attended workshops, and even shared her story at a town hall meeting. She wasn't perfect, no one is, but she was trying. And that made all the difference. The ripple effect of that one encounter continued to spread, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted. It was a reminder that change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with a single moment, a single conversation, and sometimes, that's all it takes to change the world. Months after the incident at the grocery store, the town of Palo Alto was a different place. The conversation that had started that day had grown into a movement rooted in understanding, empathy, and the belief that everyone has a story worth hearing. Elon Musk's calm and thoughtful response to Mrs. Johnson's racist remark had become a symbol of hope. People across the country, and even around the world, looked to his words as an example of how to handle prejudice with grace and strength. But for Elon, the real victory wasn't in the headlines or the viral moments. It was in the small, everyday changes he saw in the community. The grocery store where it all began had become a hub of connection. Shoppers who had once passed each other in silence now stopped to chat, sharing stories and building relationships. The manager, inspired by the events, had started a program to highlight the diverse backgrounds of the store's employees and customers. Each week, a new story was featured on a bulletin board near the entrance, reminding everyone that every person has a unique journey. Mrs. Johnson, too, had undergone a transformation. She had become a regular at the store's community events, often sharing her own story of growth and change. She wasn't proud of her past, but she was determined to make amends. Her journey became a source of inspiration for others who were struggling to confront their own biases. One day, as she stood in line at the checkout, she noticed a young boy staring at her. He was holding his mother's hand, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Hi there," Mrs. Johnson said, smiling warmly. The boy hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Are you the lady who said sorry to Elon Musk?" Mrs. Johnson chuckled softly. "Yes, I am," she said. "And you know what? Saying sorry was one of the best things I've ever done." The boy's mother smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for sharing your story," she said. "It's made a big difference for a lot of people." For Elon, the encounter had reinforced his belief in the power of dialogue. He continued to use his platform to advocate for diversity and inclusion, not just in his companies but in society as a whole. He often reflected on that day in the grocery store, reminding himself that change begins with a single conversation. As for the town of Palo Alto, it had become a model for other communities. Schools, businesses, and local organizations worked together to create spaces where everyone felt welcome and valued. The ripple effect of that one moment had grown into a wave of positive change, touching lives in ways no one could have imagined. And so, the story of the racist woman who told Elon Musk to go back to Africa became something much bigger than a viral moment. It became a reminder that even in the face of hatred and ignorance, kindness and understanding can prevail. It became a testament to the power of one person's courage to stand up for what's right. But most of all, it became a story of hope. A story that showed us all that no matter how divided we may seem, we have the power to come together and create a better world. And that's a story worth telling. Stories like this one, whether they happen in a grocery store, a coffee shop, or somewhere else entirely, have a way of sticking with us. They make us think. They make us feel, and sometimes, they even make us want to be a little better. Now here's the thing. While this particular story is a product of imagination because, let's be real, Elon Musk probably doesn't have time to argue over avocados, the ideas behind it are as real as it gets. Diversity, inclusion, and the power of a good conversation, those aren't just themes for a story. They're the building blocks of a better world. So even though Elon might not have actually had this exact chat with a feisty shopper in Palo Alto, the message still stands. We all have the power to make a difference, whether it's by standing up for what's right, challenging our own beliefs, or simply treating others with a little more kindness. And hey, if this story made you stop and think, even for a second, then it's done its job. Maybe it inspired you to have a tough conversation, to learn something new, or to just be a little more open-minded. That's the magic of stories. They don't have to be 100% real to make a real impact. So let's take this as a reminder: the world is full of stories, and we're all writing our own. Why not make yours one worth telling? Let's keep the conversation going, keep challenging the status quo, and keep striving to be the change we want to see. After all, the best stories are the ones that don't just stay on the page, they come to life in the way we live, love, and treat each other. Now go out there and make your story a good one. If this story made you believe in the power of one conversation to change the world, hit that like button right now. Let's show the world that kindness and understanding can win. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Join us. Because stories like this, they're just the beginning. Together we can create a world where everyone belongs. And hey, if this story touched you, leave a comment below and tell me what's one small act of kindness you can do today. Together we can create a world where everyone belongs. Seriously, it takes half a second, and it lets me know you're into this kind of content. And if you're not already subscribed, what are you waiting for? Click that button right now. There are plenty more stories where this one came from, and I'd love for you to be here for the next one. Oh, and one last thing, share this with someone. A friend, a family member, that coworker who always has something to say. Because stories like this, they're meant to be shared, they're meant to start conversations, and who knows, maybe the next big change will start with you. So let's keep the good vibes rolling. Like, subscribe, and let's make the world a little brighter, one story at a time. And if you think this story was powerful, wait until you hear what happened when a single mom stood up to a CEO in a coffee shop. What she said next left everyone speechless, and it all started with just one word. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.